Mark was a man who lived by his principles: work hard, love deeply, and provide endlessly for his family. A lead designer at a reputable tech firm in Chicago, his days were filled with intense brainstorming sessions, client presentations, and deadlines that never seemed to end. Yet, Mark never complained. He took pride in his work and saw it as a means to create a better life for his family, his wife, Linda, and their 7-year-old son, Leo. Linda was everything Mark thought he wanted in a partner. She was vibrant, charming, and always seemed to light up a room. They had been married for almost a decade, and although the grind of daily life sometimes took its toll, Mark believed their bond was strong. Then there was Leo, a curious and energetic boy who filled their home with laughter and endless chatter. Leo was fascinated by the world of video blogging. He loved imitating his favorite YouTubers, running around the house with his small phone camera, narrating his adventures. He was particularly fond of creating impromptu shows about the family dog, Rusty, or his latest toy cars. Leo made his videos just for himself. Given his young age, he has not yet posted his videos on the internet or maintained any social networks. "Hey Dad, want to see my new video?" Leo would often say, thrusting his phone into Mark's hands. Mark always watched, admiring his son's creativity and enthusiasm. However, as much as he appreciated Leo's budding hobby, Mark couldn't ignore the fact that his son was spending too much time on his phone. One evening, as Mark relaxed in his home office, an idea struck him. It was time to set up parental controls on Leo's phone. He wanted to ensure Leo wasn't overusing it for games and to monitor his activity more closely. Mark picked up the phone from Leo's room while the boy was sleeping and started exploring its content. As he scrolled through a folder labeled Videos, he couldn't help but smile at the thumbnails of Leo's antics. Curiosity got the better of him, and Mark began watching some of the videos. There was one where Leo gave an animated review of his favorite Lego set, and another where he pretended to interview Rusty. Mark chuckled to himself, admiring his son's vivid imagination. Then, he stumbled upon a video file without a title. It was dated just a few weeks ago, and the thumbnail showed a blurry image of their living room. Mark tapped on it, expecting another one of Leo's playful narratives. The screen flickered to life, and there was Leo, his bright round face filling the frame. His eyes sparkled with mischief as he leaned closer to the camera, his voice a playful whisper. "Hey, followers," Leo began, grinning ear to ear. "Today Mom is dating a dude named Chris. But it's a secret. I can't tell Dad so he doesn't get upset. Mom said not to say anything. If you want to know what happens next, like it." Mark stared at the screen, frozen. His first thought was that it must be a game, one of Leo's imaginative stories. After all, kids said the darndest things, right? He chuckled nervously, dismissing the strange pang in his chest. But curiosity nagged at him. He exited the video and scrolled through the others in the folder. One caught his eye. It was dated the same day as the last video, but had a slightly longer runtime. Mark hesitated for a moment before pressing play. The scene shifted. Leo stood by the window, his camera trained on the driveway. He zoomed in on Linda, who was walking toward her car, purse slung over her shoulder. "Here's Mom walking to her car," Leo whispered dramatically, as if narrating a spy movie. "I wonder where she and Chris are going. It's our little secret. I was given a bunch of candy and allowed to skip homework. Guys, I need to eat the candy fast because Aunt Sarah is coming to babysit me, and she forbids me sweets. Subscribe." Mark's breath caught in his throat. His initial amusement was quickly being replaced by something colder, heavier. His mind raced through possibilities, searching for a reasonable explanation. Maybe this was just one of Leo's elaborate games. Linda wouldn't. But then why was she leaving the house in the middle of the day? And who was Chris? Mark couldn't shake the strange, sinking feeling that this wasn't imaginary. As much as he wanted to, he couldn't ignore the way Leo's tone had shifted in those videos. It wasn't playful. It was earnest, excited. And that part about the candy? It was too specific, too intentional. For the next few days, Mark couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. He started paying closer attention to Linda's behavior. She had always been vibrant and chatty, but lately he noticed moments where she seemed distracted, her phone always within arm's reach. She'd laugh at something on her screen but quickly lock it when Mark entered the room. Her mood would shift unexpectedly, light and cheerful one moment, tense and guarded the next. And then there were the errands she'd run, often at odd hours. She had always been independent, but now her comings and goings seemed deliberate. Mark chose not to confront her, not yet. He didn't want to make accusations without proof, but inside, doubt was festering. Every time he looked at Leo, bouncing around the house with his smartphone, Mark felt a pang of guilt. His son was too innocent to understand the weight of what he had captured. Yet, in his own way, Leo had given Mark a glimpse into something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Mark decided he needed time to think, to plan. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. After a sleepless night, he reached out to a private detective agency. A man named Rick Townsend, a seasoned investigator with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor, took the case. Rick listened carefully as Mark explained the situation, his voice tight with emotion. "I just need to know," Mark said, his tone barely above a whisper. Rick nodded. "I'll handle it discreetly. You'll have the truth soon enough." Over the next 2 weeks, Rick worked tirelessly. He trailed Linda during her errands, following her car from their suburban neighborhood to an upscale part of the city. She parked in the garage of an elite restaurant, La Ciel, a high-end establishment known for its exclusivity and glamour. There, Rick spotted her meeting a man, a tall, well-dressed figure with sharp features and an air of confidence. His name was Christopher, or Chris, as Mark would later learn. A successful restaurant owner, Chris exuded charm and wealth, his reputation well known in local circles. Rick didn't stop there. His surveillance uncovered a pattern. After their dinners, Linda and Chris would drive to a rented apartment not far from the restaurant. The detective captured photographs of their meetings, a candid shot of them laughing over drinks, another of them holding hands as they entered the apartment. He even recorded snippets of their conversations, subtle yet damning evidence of an intimate relationship. Despite her careful demeanor, using cash for transactions, parking in secluded spots, and keeping her phone on silent, Linda couldn't evade Rick's meticulous observation. When Rick delivered the file to Mark, the evidence was irrefutable. The pictures, the audio, even a note Chris had slipped her during one of their dinners. It all painted a heartbreaking picture. Mark stared at the photographs, his heart shattering with every image. He couldn't believe this was the same woman he had loved for so many years, the mother of his son. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in his chest. But what hurt even more was the role Leo had played, however innocent. For days, Mark spiraled into a deep depression. He struggled to focus at work, his once methodical mind clouded by anger and despair. At home, he felt like a stranger, unable to meet Linda's eyes without seeing the evidence of her infidelity. And Leo, his cheerful, oblivious son, became a painful reminder of the twisted secret that had infiltrated their family. Mark decided he needed to know more. One day, after Linda had stepped out to store, Mark sat down with his son in the living room. "Hey, buddy," Mark said, forcing a smile. "Can we talk for a second?" Leo, who was playing a racing game on his tablet, glanced up. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" Mark hesitated, his heart pounding. "So, remember those videos you made? The ones about Mom and Chris?" Leo's face froze for a split second before he quickly returned to his game. "Oh, that? It's just a joke, Dad. I was pretending, like I always do." Mark leaned forward, trying to keep his voice calm. "But you said some pretty specific things, bud. Stuff about candy and skipping homework. Did Mom tell you to say those things?" Leo shrugged, his attention still on the screen. "I don't remember. Can I go back to my game now?" Mark clenched his jaw. "Leo, this is important. I just want to understand. Who is Chris?" Leo set the tablet down, his small hands fidgeting. "Dad, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it." Mark sighed, leaning back in defeat. It was clear that Linda had coached Leo well, turning his natural playfulness into a shield for her secrets. Mark's frustration boiled over, but he reminded himself that Leo was just a child, a pawn in a situation far beyond his comprehension. "I'm not mad, Leo," Mark said softly. I love you. You know that, right?" Leo nodded, but his eyes remained downcast. Mark wanted to say more, to assure his son that none of this was his fault, but the words caught in his throat. The betrayal had fractured something deep within him, and for the first time in his life, Mark felt utterly powerless. As Leo returned to his game, Mark sat there staring at the wall, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a crushing tide. Mark spent days trying to wrestle his emotions into submission. Yet, he decided against confronting her in a heated argument. A messy scene would only worsen things, especially for Leo. He resolved to leave, not out of cowardice, but to salvage the pieces of himself that hadn't yet shattered. He called his supervisor at work and submitted his resignation. His colleagues were shocked. Mark was the cornerstone of their design team, but he gave no detailed explanation. He withdrew a modest amount of money from their joint account, just enough to cover rent and essentials for a few months. Then, while Linda was out again, Mark sat down at the dining table with pen and paper. He poured his heartbreak into a few succinct sentences. "Linda, I know everything. You made your choice. Now I'll make mine. I'm leaving. I'll provide everything Leo needs, but for now, I need space to heal. I hope you can respect that. Mark." He placed the note where she would see it and packed a small suitcase. Then he took the boy to school, kissed him on the forehead. When it was done, Mark left. Mark drove aimlessly until he reached a quiet, small town 1 hour away. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, and everyone seemed too preoccupied with their own lives to notice a stranger. He rented a modest apartment and began the slow, agonizing process of piecing himself back together. When Linda returned home, she found the note on the kitchen counter. At first, she thought it was a joke, a dramatic gesture meant to guilt her into spending more time at home. But as she read the words again, their weight sank in. Her first instinct was to call Mark. When he picked up, his voice was calm but lifeless, like a man drained of everything that made him who he was. "Mark, what is this?" she demanded. "You can't just leave like this. What do you mean you know everything?" "I mean exactly that," Mark replied, his tone flat. "I know about you and Chris." Linda froze, her mind racing. "What are you talking about? Did Leo say something stupid again? He's always making things up. You know how kids are." "Leo has nothing to do with this," Mark interrupted firmly. "This isn't about him. This is about you and the choices you made." Linda's voice grew sharper. "So you're going to punish me by disappearing? By abandoning your son? What kind of father does that?" "I haven't abandoned him," Mark said quietly. "I'll make sure he has everything he needs. But I can't be there right now. I'm leaving everything to you, the house, the savings, everything. I just need peace." Linda's anger flared. "You think you can just vanish and leave me to deal with everything? That's not how this works, Mark. If you're leaving, fine. But we're going to make it official. I'm filing for divorce, and you'd better believe I'll be asking for alimony." Mark sighed. "Do whatever you need to do. I won't fight you on it." "Damn right you won't," Linda snapped before hanging up. Linda stormed into Leo's room, her face a mask of barely restrained fury. The boy, sensing her mood, shrank back on his bed. "What did you tell your father?" she demanded, her voice cold and accusing. Leo's eyes widened. "Nothing, Mom. I didn't say anything, I swear." "Don't lie to me, Leo," she shouted. "You must have said something to him. You're always running your mouth, aren't you?" Tears welled up in Leo's eyes. I didn't mean to do anything bad," he stammered. "Of course you didn't," Linda said bitterly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But now your father's gone, and it's all because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." Leo began to cry, but Linda ignored him, pacing the room as she vented her frustration. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you? I've done everything for this family, and this is how you repay me?" The boy curled into himself, sobbing quietly. After a few moments, Linda seemed to realize what she was doing. She sighed heavily, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Just go to sleep," she muttered, her voice softer now but still tinged with frustration. "We'll talk tomorrow." As she left the room, slamming the door behind her, Leo buried his face in his pillow. The envelope came on a gray Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who knocked firmly at Mark's door. Mark, still groggy from a restless night, opened it to find a stack of divorce papers staring back at him. Linda wasn't bluffing. She wanted it all. Full custody of Leo, ownership of the house, the majority of their savings, and a hefty alimony payment based on the salary Mark had earned at his former job. For a moment, Mark felt the familiar despair creeping back in. But as he read through the demands, a spark of defiance flickered in him. This wasn't just about Linda anymore. It was about protecting his future and Leo's. Mark pulled out his phone and called the best family lawyer he could afford, a man named Michael Tate. Michael was a sharp, experienced attorney known for his tenacity in court. After their first meeting, Michael outlined his strategy. "Mark," he said, leaning forward, "you can't roll over and let her take everything. I'll make sure the custody arrangement is fair and that you're not bled dry financially. But I'll need to use the evidence we have. And frankly, I think we should request a DNA test for Leo. It's a precaution, but it strengthens your case." Mark balked at the idea. "A DNA test? No. Leo's my son. I don't want to put him through that." "I understand," Michael said calmly. "But Linda isn't playing fair. She's already painting you as the absentee father who abandoned his family. We need to make a strong case to protect you, and Leo." Reluctantly, Mark agreed. He hated the idea, but he trusted Michael's judgment. When Linda learned that Mark had hired a lawyer, she was blindsided. She had expected him to quietly accept her terms, as he always avoided conflict. But when Michael submitted evidence of her affair with Chris, photos, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline of her deceit, it completely derailed her narrative. "You had me followed?" Linda hissed at Mark during a tense hallway exchange outside the courtroom. "No," Mark replied quietly, "but the truth has a way of coming out." Linda's confidence wavered, but she pressed on, demanding full custody of Leo and the lion's share of their assets. Her argument hinged on Mark's recent unemployment and his decision to leave the family home, which she portrayed as abandonment. Michael countered by presenting the evidence of infidelity and arguing that Mark had left to avoid escalating conflict, not out of neglect. He also revealed Linda's demands for extravagant alimony, emphasizing that she was already financially stable and didn't require such support. Then came the request for the DNA test. Linda's face paled when it was brought up. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "Leo is Mark's son." "If that's true," Michael said smoothly, "the test will confirm it. There's nothing to worry about." The judge ordered the test, much to Linda's fury. A few weeks later, the results came back. Leo was indeed Mark's biological son. Though relieved, Mark couldn't shake the sadness that it had even been necessary. After weeks of hearings, the court finally issued its decision. Custody. Joint custody was granted, though Mark and Linda reached a private agreement allowing Leo to choose where he would live and for how long. This arrangement was designed to minimize disruption to Leo's life and give him a sense of agency. Assets and finances. The house was sold, with the proceeds split fairly between Mark and Linda. The court recognized Mark's efforts to avoid conflict and his willingness to leave a larger share to Linda. Alimony was reduced to a minimal amount, reflecting Linda's infidelity and Mark's current employment status. Leo's best interests. The court emphasized that both parents needed to prioritize Leo's well-being. Though bitter toward each other, Mark and Linda agreed to shield Leo from further conflict. After the trial, Leo moved in with Linda full-time. Mark had agreed to let him stay with Mother. Mark kept his promises. He ensured Leo had everything he needed and called often to check in. But Leo's voice on the other end of the line was hesitant and uncertain, a far cry from his usual cheerful tone. Unbeknownst to Mark, Leo carried a heavy burden. Leo thought it was his fault that his dad had left and his parents had divorced. Linda, too, was slipping into her own darkness. When Chris learned that Linda was no longer married, his interest in her evaporated. To him, the allure of secrecy and danger had been the point. Without it, she was just another woman, and he moved on without so much as a goodbye. Heartbroken and humiliated, Linda fell into a deep depression. Her once vibrant personality dulled, and she began neglecting not only herself, but also Leo. Days blurred into each other, and small tasks, like making dinner or helping with homework, became insurmountable. Her friends and colleagues, who had once admired her, distanced themselves after learning about her affair and the trial's revelations. Leo felt the shift keenly. His once doting mother became distant, and he found himself alone more often than not. Occasionally he would call Mark, his small voice trembling with uncertainty. "Dad," Leo whispered one night, "do you think I made everything worse?" The question shattered Mark. He realized just how deeply the situation had affected his son. "No, Leo," Mark said firmly, his voice gentle. "None of this is your fault. Not one bit. I love you, buddy, and if you ever want to come live with me, my door is always open." Though Leo didn't move in immediately, Mark's reassurance planted a seed of hope. Meanwhile, Mark was slowly rebuilding his life. He had opened a small design studio in the heart of the town, pouring his creativity into projects that gave him a sense of purpose. The studio wasn't just work, it was a sanctuary. One of his first collaborators was Victoria, a talented photographer and videographer with a keen eye for storytelling. Victoria was smart, driven, and down-to-earth. She and Mark clicked instantly, their creative energies complementing each other. At first, their relationship was strictly professional, but as weeks turned into months, the connection between them deepened. Victoria's warmth and humor became a balm for Mark's weary soul, though neither of them rushed anything. One day, during a casual conversation, Victoria learned about Leo's passion for making videos. She lit up with enthusiasm, offering to teach him new techniques if he ever wanted to learn. "That sounds great," Mark said with a smile. "But Leo's been through a lot. He's scared to pick up a camera again." "Well," Victoria replied thoughtfully, "sometimes all it takes is someone who believes in you." Encouraged by Mark, Leo started visiting his father more often. At first, he was quiet and withdrawn, but the safe, calm environment Mark created began to draw him out of his shell. Victoria's presence also helped. She treated Leo like a little brother, teaching him about lighting, angles, and editing whenever he showed interest. "Here," she said one afternoon, handing Leo one of her cameras. "Why don't you try this out? No pressure. Just have fun." Tentatively, Leo began filming again. Small things at first. A squirrel in the park, a funny moment with Mark. As he grew more comfortable, his videos became more ambitious. The spark that had once fueled his passion returned, and Leo's laughter began to fill Mark's home. Before long, Leo was spending most of his time with Mark, and eventually he moved in permanently. The boy's confidence blossomed, and Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose as a father. Linda's life, in contrast, continued to unravel. She felt the sting of judgment from her peers, and the emptiness of her once active social life. The few remaining friends she had grew tired of her constant negativity and self-pity, leaving her even more isolated. The loss of Leo hit her the hardest. Though he still visited occasionally, the bond between them had frayed. She tried to make amends, but her depression and regret often got in the way. The weight of her choices bore down on her, and the world she had built for herself seemed to crumble. For Mark, the future looked brighter than it had in a long time. His studio was gaining traction, and his relationship with Victoria was evolving into something meaningful. More importantly, his connection with Leo was stronger than ever. Together, they were creating a new version of family, one built on trust, understanding, and love. Leo, too, found his footing. With Mark and Victoria's support, he rediscovered his passion and began make videos. This time, his videos have been posted online before. His channel grew slowly but steadily, and he started receiving positive feedback for his creativity and storytelling. Though the scars of the past remained, Mark and Leo were proof that even in the wake of betrayal, healing and growth were possible. In the months following Leo's move to live with Mark, Linda's life spiraled further out of control. Overwhelmed by guilt, loneliness, and the consequences of her choices, she turned to alcohol for solace. The vibrant, confident woman she once was seemed to disappear entirely. Her career suffered as her behavior became increasingly erratic. Mark, hearing about Linda's worsening condition from mutual acquaintances, felt a mix of anger and pity. He had every reason to leave her to face the consequences of her actions alone. But when he saw how much Leo still longed for a normal mom, Mark knew he had to act, not for Linda, but for their son. With the help of some relatives, Mark intervened. Despite Linda's initial resistance, he arranged for her to enter a rehabilitation program, ensuring she had the support she needed. Slowly but surely, Linda began to heal. She completed the program and committed to sobriety, attending therapy to address not just her addiction, but the deep regrets that weighed on her. She often reflected on how much Mark had done for her, even after their marriage had fallen apart. His selflessness left her deeply humbled. Though Linda couldn't undo the damage she had caused, she found a renewed purpose in becoming a better mother for Leo. She began to rebuild her relationship with him, expressing her love and remorse through actions rather than words. And while she knew she could never fully repay Mark for what he had done, she would forever be grateful that he had stepped in when she was at her lowest. For Mark, helping Linda wasn't about rekindling their past. It was about ensuring a better future for Leo. In seeing her recover, he found a measure of peace, knowing that his son would now have the mother he deserved. And though their paths had diverged, Linda's healing became another testament to Mark's unwavering strength and compassion. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.